Greetings and welcome. I'm glad to have you here. Before we begin, let me take a few moments to give the obligatory like, comment, and subscribe, and more importantly, share. Share it with a friend, a neighbor, or with that Nigerian prince that keeps promising you money. Let's try and get this channel past 1,000 subscribers. And while you're busy harassing the spammers, be sure to check out my Patreon channel. Consider becoming a subscriber and help keep Gregor energized with pizza and beer. Seriously, Gregor's half the magic here, so let's give him some love. Links are in the video description and in the page description in both YouTube and Rumble. And lastly, a quick shout out to my Tier 3 and 4 patrons. Russ of the Frozen North, New5AC, Nick, Zachary Langmead, Scared Wolf 1206, and Zachery Raney. Thank you very much. And now, on with the story. The Deathworlders, a story by Philip R. Johnson, a.k.a. Hambone, Hambone HFY, and Hambone 3110. Chapter 27, Playing with Fire. Part 1. Date point, 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 3 days AV. HMS Caledonia, Perfection System, The Core Worlds. Technical Sergeant Martina Kovac. The mad thought that was first and foremost in Martina's mind was that Caledonia's general alarm should have sounded more serious. She was on a starship, for crying out loud, and the fact that said starship was on fire in a major way really warranted more than the almost quiet da-da-da-da-da-da-da warble. This was not a situation for cartoon cop car noise. There were gouts of flame shooting out of the air vents, powered systems shutting off all around as their surge protectors cut in, and the hull was singing as the heat stretched and expanded it. Caledonia was groaning like a wounded whale. This was a situation demanding loud, harsh tones with a deep backbone, something that really advertised the importance of prompt action. The reason this particular unreasonable train of thought was occupying her attention was that it was helping her cope with the fact that she was stuck in a pressurized tube of air thousands of light years from home, which was currently on fire. She really did not want to burn to death out here. Suffocating on smoke, depressurization, and electrocution were all options as well, and this was not a fact calculated to help her stay calm. Focusing on the stupid little thing that the alarm was completely wrong helped her ignore the bigger problems. Everybody on board was a firefighter. Nobody was allowed to serve in any capacity on Caledonia without that training. Martina was armed with a pair of fireball extinguishers, red balls that were to be thrown into the heart of any nearby flames, which would burn through their casings and allow the pressurized mix of inert gas and flame-retardant foam within to burst, smothering the flame instantly. They worked well, and between her and the teams with a hose and some more conventional extinguishers, they were battling the flame back out of their station. She tried very hard indeed not to think too hard about the fact that the ventilation duct in the ceiling was glowing like barbecue coals. It was part of a long list of things she was not thinking about, including the fact that Caledonia's capacitors contained enough stored energy that if they discharged uncontrollably, then everybody on board would be dead in an instant. Whether they died from gigavolts of energy arcing uncontrollably between the bulkheads like the ultimate bug zapper, or from the whole cap array detonating with all the violence of a nuke, well, that would be academic. Not thinking about that one was made very difficult every time the lights flickered. So, instead, she focused on the little things, like doing her job, or that fucking alarm. There was a cry of, "Left side!" from Petty Officer Taylor. Why was immediately obvious, sparking electrical apparatus, one of the power lockers feeding into the hangar's huge force field arrays. As a team, they'd made it safe, shutting off the power to that locker, making sure it wasn't burning, ensuring the pressure doors were all sealed, and that their section was completely free of flames. The last of the fire was contained by closing the life support vent. The air inside would still be superheated, and the air in starboard bay was going to be stale, smoky, and hot for a long time. They were in the middle of tentatively relaxing when there was what distantly sounded like an explosion somewhere else on board the ship, and the lights flickered again. "Still here," somebody muttered, then flinched as the brace alarm sounded. That one was everything the fire alarm was not: urgent, loud, and intimidating. "They're dumping the cap!" somebody else yelled. As one, they sprang for the wall. There were rails at waist and ankle height, one for holding, one for hooking their toes under. Most of them made it. Martina didn't. The lights dropped out, and the gravity went with it. Martina wasn't secured yet. Her last footsteps towards the wall carried her forwards, but it also launched her. Off-balanced and disoriented in the brief dark, she bounced painfully off the wall. Worse, her trajectory on rebound was carrying her right towards the same glowing duct the flames had been belching from just seconds before. The emergency lights came up. She twisted to try and grab the bar. Her fingertips missed by a millimeter. No! She didn't mean to scream. There was just no way not to. She heard and felt herself sizzle before she bounced off the superheated conduit and floated back across the deck, flailing madly at the horrible pain right down her back. Shit! Help her, for fuck's sake! I've got you! A strong hand caught her wrist and pulled her to safety. She was in so much blinding pain that a rescuer needed to guide her hands to the hold bar and help her tuck her feet under the rail, but she was able to hold on. The gravity came back on at a fraction of its former strength, and Martina sank to the deck, shaking. People were all around her in a heartbeat. Medical team to starboard flight deck! Get some water on her! A shockingly cold load of water was dumped down her back, soaking into her clothing immediately. It helped. A little. Kovac! Kovac! Come on, you okay? She was able to open her eyes at least and make eye contact. One of Rebar's suit techs, Miller, was crouched next to her. Behind his breathing gear, she could see that he was wide-eyed with concern. How did words go again? She tried to say anything, but what came out was kind of a childish cry instead, as her clothing weighed agonizingly against the burn. It's okay, it's okay. If it hurts, that means it's only partial, Miller reassured her. Martina shut her eyes again and took a few deep breaths, as much as her fire mask would let her. God damn it! That doesn't help, she managed. Hey, that's good too. Talking is good, Miller sounded thoroughly relieved. Gotta get the burnt clothes off, Kovac, somebody else said. Martina put her head down and nodded by way of assent. Removing the burnt clothing was part of their burn treatment training. She'd never foreseen being on the receiving end, but she felt the safety blade rip downwards from her collar, opening the back of her clothing from neck to knee. The tug of the wet cloth and her wound's exposure to the hot, dry air of the ship combined so that the pain came right back, just as intense as before. All she could do was kneel there, gripping the bar so tight she'd swear it was creaking, and cry. Shh! It's okay, it's okay. Let's get some more water on this. More blessedly cold water was poured down her back, and somebody put a foil blanket round her. The frigid liquid damped the pain, but now she was shivering and cold into the bargain. How bad is it? She asked, once she felt able. You've got a small, full-thickness patch, but it's mostly just blisters, Miller assessed. You okay? This really, really, really fucking hurts. Martina didn't like how the last word came out as a sob. She wasn't a little girl, fuckdammit. She was one of the SOR's senior non-commissioned officers. Crying over pain was beneath her. If only the rest of her would listen to that thought. You're holding together great, Miller told her, reading her mind and gently prying her hands off the bar so that she could hold it. Even through her thick firefighting gloves, the reassuring squeeze helped. There was a bustling noise from nearby. Medics and a litter. Okay, burn. Mechanism? Contact with hot metal. She fell into it when the gravity went, Miller reported. Sergeant, are you okay? Martina knew that he'd want to hear her voice so he could assess her for a burn on her vocal cords, so she made an effort to speak rather than just shake her head. I'll be honest, she managed. I'm not great. Okay, let's get you moved. Here we go. Gently, hands helped her onto the litter. Somehow, she managed to avoid vocalizing more than a kind of shocked inhalation when another flare of agony rippled down her back. Okay, you're doing great. Martina found something about that assertion funny. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe it was that or keep crying like a little girl. Yay! Arr! She wound up in the recovery position on the litter, draped under the blanket. One of the medics shone a light in her face quickly and apparently found nothing alarming. There was a hoist, and she was up and being carried. Atta girl, let's get you to the doctor. Has the ship stopped being on fire yet? Martina asked. That seems kind of important. Yeah, it's out, somebody replied. Cool. Great. The trip to the hospital was just across the beam of the ship, not far at all. She wasn't alone, though most of the wounded coming in were walking, or at least leaning on their buddies. Triage! What have we got? Contact burn, partial thickness with blistering and about 9% TBSA, and a coin-sized patch of full thickness. No inhalation. Put her over there, Sergeant. Martina looked up as best she could as one of the doctors knelt by her. It'll be a few minutes before we can take a proper look at you, he said, pulling a white stick out of its sterile packaging. Until then, this is pain relief, open wide. Martina nodded and complied, and the doctor inserted it under her tongue. There we go. Are you comfortable? Martina replied, as best she could with the stick under her tongue. Maybe it was the adrenaline, but the sound of her own voice made her giggle. Franco. The doctor gave her a nod and stood up, leaving her to wait. Really, all they needed to do was give her the pain relief. There were some doses of Crew D left over in their locker on the starboard hangar, all dosed for mild workout and exhaustion amongst the operators. Adjusting for her own much lesser weight, each one was more than adequate dose to fix her burns. She was just reflecting on her good fortune in having access to that stuff when there was a shouting from the doorway and a new litter arrived. This one had a man on it, supine, intubated, and groaning like a zombie. His face was... Martina shut her eyes. The poor bastard deserved not to be stared at, though what she'd seen suggested that was exactly what he was in for the rest of his life. Maybe it was the stick in her mouth. Maybe it was the sudden dose of perspective, but all of a sudden, her own pain seemed very small and far away. Date point. 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 3 days AV. HMS Caledonia, Perfection System. The Core Worlds. Chief Michael Andau. The air probably tasted of smoke, ozone, and burnt material, some proportion of which was almost certainly human flesh. Chief Andau wouldn't know. He was on bottled oxygen, as were the rest of his team. The air was mostly argon and carbon monoxide anyways. Trying to breathe it would have killed them, and hurt the whole time they were dying. Still, they were alive. Reactor section chiefs on a military starship were an exclusive breed. There were only a total of 8, and all of them had the kind of academic education previously found only in scientific agencies like NASA and CERN. Andau and his counterpart on HMS Myrmidon in particular had to occupy the very top of that select group because their charges, unlike the 6 V-class destroyers, were hybrids, advanced alien ships that had been gutted and extensively refitted with human equipment. Very little remained of the original systems, and what few were there had to interface with human hardware that used none of the same standards and protocols. Their lives were dominated by laws and equations, the most important of which was ancient, Newton's second law of motion. Force is equal to mass times acceleration. HMS Caledonia had a mass of approximately 9 million kilograms. She was equipped with hyper-efficient, alien-made kinetic thrusters that could translate electrical energy almost directly into kinetic energy via quantum mechanical processes so arcane and so completely unintuitive to human sensibilities that all the Jet Propulsion Lab's devoted efforts had made little headway on understanding exactly how they worked. But ultra-advanced, impenetrable, almost magic engines still had to deal with realities like force equals mass times acceleration, and to get any kind of a respectable acceleration out of a mass that large required an enormous force. Callie, between the Atlassian strength of her spinal structural keel and a reinforcing series of internal force fields, was well equipped to handle that force, which just left the question of energy. Thermodynamics dictated that increasing the kinetic energy of an object by any amount required, at a minimum, the insertion of a slightly larger amount of energy. That was governed by another classic Newtonian equation. Kinetic energy is equivalent to half the mass of the object times the square of its velocity. Given a mass of 9 million kilograms, adding a stately 10 meters per second to the ship every second demanded roughly 450 megawatts. Accounting for inefficiency, loss, and power to necessary systems such as, say, life support, Callie's 3 reactors, bleeding-edge fusion things that had been purely speculative in the pre-contact world, between them produced just about enough to let her pull 3 Gs if power was deserted from non-essential systems. Allied strategic intelligence had surmised from what they could glean from Dominion, Alliance, and Hunter vessels that this was perfectly adequate for a competitive warship. But, of course, what was really desired was an edge, say, double or triple that rate of acceleration when needed. Hence, the ultracapacitors. These were human-built, and while the technology had been derived from alien salvage, this time its principles were well understood and had even been refined upon. Much of the ship's spare space and cargo capacity had been given over to them, and the immense power buses that could shunt gigawatts of power and then some. There was a certain movie quote that was forbidden on Chief Andau's deck on pain of motivation, to the kinetic thrusters, the warp engine, and the force field emitters on the hull as the CIC and the bridge demanded. And all of that was without accounting for the waste heat and efficiency. The energies involved in waste heat alone were somewhat on the same general order as one of the war-ending nukes of 1945 every half an hour. Caledonia, in short, was a fine-tuned and high-strung Frankensteinian terror whose engineering team wrestled daily with a seething electrical demon that wanted nothing more than to lash out, burn through its surroundings, destroy lives, and scorch whatever it could touch. There was a reason that literally everybody on board pulled double duty as a fireman. If not, they might have been lost with all hands today. Things had run that close. There was a sickened sound from able seaman Wilkes. Fuck. I think I just found Kendrick. Andau grimaced inside his mask. You sure it's Kendrick? There was a note of barely restrained nauseous hysteria in Wilkes' voice. He looks a bit different right now, Chief. Andau could imagine. He still had vivid memories of the first time he'd seen a half-burned corpse. Okay, go get some clean air, sort yourself out, he told the young man, not unkindly. Last thing he needed right now was Wilkes vomiting inside his mask. Yes, Chief. That leaves two. Andau glanced at the XO. Lieutenant Commander McDaniel looked just as pale and grim behind her mask as Wilkes must be feeling, but she was composed. She turned aside to let Wilkes pass, then inspected the twisted thing that had once been one of Andau's team. It helped to think of it as an object rather than to dwell too much on the vibrant, intelligent engineer who had once lived in it. Evans and Patel would have been further back near the safety locker, Andau observed. Here's hoping, McDaniel commented. I assume this bank's a write-off. Not necessarily, Andau ran a practiced eye over the damage. In fact, it looks a lot worse than it is. The insulating foam held up well enough. I don't trust anything aft of here. He gestured towards the fifth rack of capacitors. But everything forward of that should be okay once we've cleaned it up and checked it safe. So we've got some cap. Enough to limp home, ma'am, once we're able to charge it. Wilkes returned with a bit of color in his cheeks and a determined look in his eye. Andau gave him a nod. They picked their way past the unfortunate Kendrick's remains, and Andau just had to exhale relief when he saw a happy green light shining bright through the smoke haze. At least one person had made it inside the safety locker. He knocked on its solid door and got 2 strong knocks back. The panel next to the station, sturdy and almost antique technology, built robust enough to survive practically anything, crackled. Chief, is that you? Patel. That was a real relief. The whole reactor team's morale would have taken a gut punch if their girl had been harmed, backwards and slightly sexist though that maybe was. Old instincts died hard after all. Sure is, he told her warmly. Evans in there with you? He's a bit scorched, but we're okay. Did Kendrick? He was right next to it when it... I'm afraid not, Andau gave a respectful moment of silence. Air masks on, hooky, he told her, using the slang for a leading rate. Yes, Chief. There was a pause, then 3 bangs on the door, and Andau hauled the wheel over to unseal the emergency station. Patel wasn't entirely unscathed herself, having obviously only escaped a painful burn thanks to her white anti-flash hood, which was sporting a large black patch where some extreme heat had licked across it. Evans hadn't been so lucky. His own anti-flash gear had plainly spared him the worst of it, but his sleeve was so badly scorched that even his flame-resistant fabric had burned through, and behind his flash hood, his eyes were pinched and pained. Wilkes escorted the able seaman away for medical treatment. What happened? Andau asked. I really don't know, Chief, Patel shook her head. Daily inspection was going just fine, and then, bang! She wiped soot off the monitor of her workstation, but it was melted and scorched beyond any hope of function. It happened while we were testing Rack 8. Is the rest of the ship okay? She will be, Andau promised, but we've got bigger problems. How big? We had to dump the cap. The whole team knew what that meant. It meant that every relay and power cable in the whole grid would need safety checking. But more than that, everyone in engineering was acutely aware of the current charge level of the cap at all times. At point of crisis, it had been at something like 95%. An emergency discharging of all that energy into space via the force fields would have looked like a nuke going off. A big nuke. There was simply no way to stealthily get rid of that kind of energy quickly. So the locals know we're here, Patel surmised. McDaniel, who'd been recording her account for later analysis, nodded and tucked her tablet away under her armpit. Oh yes, she agreed. They know. Date point. 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 3 days AV. Heavy System Picket Utopian Aspiration. Perfection System, the Core Worlds. Fleetmaster No, Director, I cannot categorically rule out the hunters. Zik restrained the urge to give a derisive snort. If he even suspected hunters, the odd ship he was considering would have already been an expanding sphere of debris. The construction was all wrong, and in any case, the hunters relied on the very best in active cloak technology, whereas this ship seemed to have been altered after its construction to instead rely on passive means that reduced its sensor signature by a frankly astonishing degree. Even at only a few kilometers distance, even though it was attempting no maneuver and was drifting listlessly in its orbit, the sensors of every ship in his fleet were having a hard time keeping a solid lock. That was not a hunter approach to ship design. The hunters either wanted you to know they were there, or they did not. If they did, you knew. If not, you did not. Nor was this a Kelsey tactic, nor a known Dominion one. That left only a few possibilities, all of which were awkward, and one of which was downright worrying. Well, who does the ship belong to, then? Perfection's planetary director had good reason to be nervous. His predecessor had ceded the position to him in the aftermath of an attack by the so-called human disaster that had caused massive disruption, and Director Lewis's position was maintained on the promise to Perfection's citizens, and more importantly its corporations alike, that the security and protection of the system would take top priority. I refuse to speculate ahead of my evidence, Zik told him, pointedly using a quartai turn of phrase. You will know as soon as I have something conclusive to report. Avgundurkert out. He'd catch some minor trouble for so readily dismissing the being who was supposed to be his superior, but today was not the day to worry about that. Today was a day to worry about why the system defense grid sensors had abruptly and without warning detected an enormous burst of microwave radiation in high orbit above the fifth planet's 11th moon, at the precise coordinates now occupied by a ship that matched no known pattern or shipyard, and which seemed to be operating on the bare minimum of emergency power, if it was operating at all. Being a work trip came with some physical advantages, chief among them being 4 arms and the hand-eye coordination to use all of them dexterously and comfortably at the same time. Interacting with 2 data screens simultaneously was a perfectly routine trick that most children of his species learned early on in life and never let go of. So, with his left hands, he processed reports from the fleet and the opinions and thoughts of the shipmaster serving beneath him, and with the others he assessed the state of his own ship. The strange ship wasn't responding to his hails. Zik could hardly blame it. If he was any judge, they had suffered a bad fire on board. Plenty of telltale signs were there. Not least was a small but noticeable increase in the local gas density, vented atmosphere. Not the ideal way to rescue a section, but undoubtedly effective. The aftermath of that would be taking stock of the wounded and dead, a thorough assessment of the ship's systems to ensure the fire wouldn't spring up again the second they relaxed, and preliminary repair work. Fires were serious. One of the data screens flagged some new data for his information, and Zik bowed his head upon reading it, a gesture of resignation and trepidation. It was strong supporting evidence for his own downright worrying scenario. Humans had been spotted on Perfection. Date point. 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 3 days AV. HMS Caledonia, Perfection System, the Core Worlds. Chief Michael Andow. Seeing Captain Bethany without his trademark turban was a sure sign of things having gone badly tits up in the recent past, and things looked set to remain that way for the foreseeable future. They were still at quarters, and the anti-flash gear was a great equalizer that brought Sikh, Christian, and atheist alike together under a thick layer of Nomex. It also made the captain's expression unreadable as he listened. McDaniels tallied the wounded. About a third of the crew were suffering from an assortment of injuries in the form of burns, heat exhaustion, and smoke inhalation, plus one able seaman who had managed to concuss himself scrambling up the stairs. Petty Officer Kendrick had been the only fatality thus far, but there was a badly injured leading rate in the infirmary with an unhappy prognosis, even assuming he'd survived. Still, the list was much shorter than it could have been. There had been a hairy moment on sea deck aft. If not for the vacuum lockers in the emergency vent, they might have lost 10 ratings in the MCM. Andau knew that Bettini would have hated himself for doing so, but if it was a choice between 11 men or the whole crew, everybody on board knew that the captain wouldn't have the luxury of hesitating and blowing them all into space. No matter, whether by luck or skill, it hadn't come to that. The butcher's bill on Callie herself was worse. All things considered, Capacitor Bank 1 was a write-off, as was Bank 5. Bank 2, where the fire had started, could possibly be restored to 1/4 capacity. Banks 3 and 4 had both been badly ravaged. All 3 of the fusion reactors were offline pending inspection, but at least they'd been designed to restart at sea. Each one carried a permanent charge sufficient to hopefully reactivate its own fusion once it was declared safe. 6 out of every 10 of the Witch's emitters were definitely fried, and the remaining 40% needed inspection. The entire surge protection system needed safety testing and replacement of the ablative compounds that had done their job by being destroyed. Then there was the whole scorched life support system, possible heat damage, warping of the bulkheads and pressure walls, possible damage to literally every computer on the ship, and nobody knew how a kinetic thruster might respond to the kind of power surges they'd suffered, assuming the thrusters had even taken a jolt, which wasn't clear. Fortunately, diagnostics on the warp and jump engines had both returned a clean bill of health. Bettini listened to the report without interruption until Andau had finished. "How did it start?" he asked.
"I don't know, sir," Andau conceded. "It started in Bank 2, Rack 8. As for how and why, the damage to the rack's so extensive that we just may never know. It's so badly burned and melted that the damning evidence is probably destroyed."
"It spread fast from there," McDaniel observed. There was no accusation in her tone, but there was a query.
"Galley's built-in fire containment was dependent on that pixie dust foam," Andau explained. He shuffled his feet awkwardly. He loved Caledonia, and saying anything negative about her just felt wrong. But he had a duty to report the truth. "Too dependent on it. All our refits and modifications helped. They're probably the reason we only lost 1 man, but the alien structure and systems just weren't sensibly designed in the first place."
"You'd think that interstellar civilizations would figure out basic fire safety," Bettini mused.
Andau felt he had to speak up in Callie's defense now. "In fairness, sir, if we were using the alien-made fire suppression foam, the fire would have been under control in seconds," he pointed out.
"And we'd have all been running around eating each other's faces off," McDaniel said.
"There is that, slight downside, yes," Andau conceded.
"Are we going to need dry dock time?" Bettini asked.
"Undoubtedly, sir."
"Then the question of how to properly harden the ship against this happening again can wait. For now, you need to work your magic, Chief. How soon can you be ready for jump?"
3 days, Andau replied.
The figure was probably a slight overestimate, but he had learned to be pessimistic when estimating these things. That way, you were either a miracle worker, or you never had to explain why it was taking longer than you promised. "That's a long time to be sitting here with the curious alien fleet poking at us, Chief," McDaniel observed.
"Ma'am, the only difference between a capacitor and a bomb is how controlled the energy release is," Andau said. "Any of those caps in our racks could sink us, and the capacitors are just the first of the systems we need to safety test before we can recharge and jump out. We can be thorough, or we can, explode."
"Let's hope that Commodore Carruthers and the fleet get here before I'm forced to resort to talking," the captain grumbled. He had an infamous disliking for diplomacy. "At least the message buoy worked. Go on, Chief. You have work to do."
"Yes, sir."
Andau nodded to his captain, the XO, and got out of there. All things considered, he'd take half-busted and potentially explosive gigawatt power systems over wrangling with officers any day. Date point. 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 3 days AV. Heavy System Picket, Utopian Aspiration, Perfection System, The Core Worlds. Fleet Master... The fleet is spread out on a close-range formation, offering maximum sensor resolution on the crippled ship, along with accurate firing solutions that offered no hope of evasive maneuvers. A solid and unorthodox formation, one that should have made the Fleet Master feel confident. It didn't.
The capital station footage.
His Cortai technician was already calling up the information, but, as always with Cortai, she was taking the request with chilly grace. As you wish, Fleet Master, but may I ask why?
Not the footage, the sensor records,
Zik clarified.
From the point when the human fleet arrived.
Done. The information arrived instantly. There was depressingly little of it. Gravimetric sensors had suggested from gross mass alone that there were 4 classes of ships in the human fleet. Beyond that basic datum, the only information they had in detail pertained to the smallest and lightest class, a strike craft about twice the mass of a conventional starfighter, which seemed to be capable of flinging itself throughout a combat volume at unheard of accelerations, easily winning the kinetic energy advantage over its adversaries. The ship in front of him, however, was a perfect match for the estimated mass of the 2 largest ships in the human fleet. He called up a simulation of the battle and focused on the tiny human force. The first hint of its arrival had been a salvo of firepower that apparently traveled at warp. Against the sheer scale of the swarm of swarms, that salvo had achieved little, but it had seeded the intervening space between the swarm and the human fleet with gravity spikes, keeping the hunters at arm's length. That extreme range was unorthodox all by itself. At such distances, the slightest maneuver at anything capable of warp ship acceleration profile would completely ruin a firing solution. And so extreme-range kinetic bombardment was reserved for ambushing fleets at anchor or relative stationary large objects such as stations. After which, the fleet would then close to medium engagement range to press the advantage on a depleted and shocked foe. The humans, of course, had invented their starship doctrine from new principles. Using warp fields on their weaponry eliminated the need to deflect when shooting at a moving target and thus made long-range combat perfectly viable for them. Sensor records from anything other than gravimetric sources were patchy at best, but the mass didn't lie. The 2 ships matching their damaged Mystery's tonnage had remained at the rear of the human formation. It was in what was apparently a supporting role, while the 2 smaller classes, the smaller and more numerous of which may actually have been unmanned platforms of some kind, though that was unclear, formed the leading wave. So, this was a support vessel of some kind. Coupled with the breathtakingly quick action of a strike force of 4 Deathworlders on perfection who had landed, engaged in a brief pursuit through a marketplace, and then departed on a ship registered to a private Cortai captain. Oh dear. He hailed the damaged vessel personally. The time was long past for delicate probing with queries of concern and offers of aid.
Attention, unidentified human vessel,
he announced. Every member of the bridge crew went stiff and still listening.
You are in violation of Article 7 of the Dominion Charter. You are required by law to make contact by any means possible, indicating your surrender to our system authorities, whereupon your crew will be detained and your ship confiscated. Failure to comply will be considered a hostile act and you will be fired upon.
He was still calculating how long of an interval to give them with which to respond when the reply came through. The footage he received suggested the air on board the ship was still hazy and thick with the aftermath of a fire, and the white hood that the figure on the screen was wearing could only be protective gear. All that was visible of the human, in fact, were 2 dark brown eyes which seemed to focus critically on him, even through a camera. It felt uncomfortable, like the being he was addressing was identifying weak spots to attack. Attention, Dominion Fleet. As non-signatories of the Dominion Charter, we neither recognize nor agree to be bound by its authority. Our ship is in distress, and we thank you for your concern, but repairs are in hand. We will not comply with your order to surrender, and any hostile act taken against us will be treated as an act of war, it recited tersely. The translator decided that this specimen was male.
I am Fleet Master Zachery
Zik identified himself.
To whom am I speaking?
The translator automatically found an equivalent to the rank that the human named. Shipmaster Battini, he replied.
Shipmaster, your species are automatic associate members of the Dominion by dint of your status as sapient spacefaring civilization,
Zik reminded him.
The Charter is automatically binding to all species.
We do not recognize the validity of a legal system which enforces laws that have not been consented to, Battini replied. I repeat, we will not comply with your demand to surrender. Our ship is not capable of taking hostile action, and our destruction would constitute murder.
Listen here,
Zik began, but the human cut comms. A Vizcatic comtech raised a hand.
Fleetmaster?
Zik turned.
Prepare to fire a warning volley. Repeat our ultimatum. Sir,
the comms tech insisted urgently.
There's a fleet coming in at rapid warp.
Zik turned to his operations screen. Sure enough, there was a bow wave of distorted spacetime coming in. The gross mass of the incoming fleet was not high, but its velocity was unbelievable. Either every one of them was armed with a Cortai seal drive, or they had immense power plants relative to their mass.
General quarters,
he announced.
Fleet to starburst away from the human ship at best speed, holding at maximum optimal range.
The fleet spread out like a firework going off, pulse warping in straight lines directly away from the stricken human ship and coming to a relative stop again as a spherical shell some 10 kilometers thick with a 500-kilometer radius. The approaching fleet slowed and stopped nearly 500,000 kilometers away, far outside the effective range of any gun on Zik's fleet. The information he'd gleaned from Capital Station came to the forefront of the fleet master's mind. With their warp-capable weapons, the humans would not feel any disadvantage from that range at all, and already the 5 ships that had snapped back into the battlespace's inertial frame of reference were multiplying. 7 ships became 43 almost as soon as they were subluminal. 6 motherships, 1 support vessel of nigh identical tonnage to the damaged one, and 36 child ships. Not a one of them was easy to get a lock on. The icons in his overlay were blinking, meaning they represented only the probable location of a ship, to within a margin of error of some 50 kilometers. Useless for targeting purpose.
Withdraw 4/5 of the fleet,
he commanded.
Half to rally on the far side of that moon, the other half to enter an orbit at warp and await further instructions.
14 of the human ships, 2 motherships and 12 child ships, vanished off his overlay. A dim gray icon suggested where they were likely to be if they drifted along their last known vector. These too were blinking, worthless. That seemed to end the opening moves for now, with the human fleet unassailable and the bulk of his own fleet withdrawn to safety but ready to return at a moment's notice. Zik could breathe a little more easily and consider his next move.
Hail their fleet master,
he ordered. Date point, 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 3 days AV. HMS Violent, Perfection System, The Core Worlds. Commodore William Carruthers. The ETs want to parley, sir. Carruthers nodded, satisfied. His non-human counterpart had demonstrated respectable intelligence in withdrawing the bulk of his fleet in the face of an insurmountable tactical disadvantage. What was left behind was still entirely capable of obliterating Caledonia if so ordered, however. Ordinarily, he would have let the alien sweat for a few seconds, but this was too important. Accept the hail, he agreed. Calculating, he removed his own flash hood. This was not a situation for facelessness, and he could put it back on quickly enough. He was greeted with the face of a worker Turkcher, one that was verging on being elderly if he was any judge. It had a certain sagging quality to the skin around its eyes.
I am Fleet Master Zickenverkt.
The translator rendered the fleet master with a male voice. Carruthers nodded respect. I am, he paused, tasting the unfamiliar title, Fleet Master William Carruthers. I must ask you to please withdraw the remainder of your fleet from threatening our ship.
That is a violation of the Dominion Charter,
the alien replied.
I am bound by law to treat it as a pirate. I must either seize it and arrest its crew, or destroy it.
Allow me to be clear, Carruthers warned.
Any hostile act towards HMS Caledonia will be met with force. There was a pause of some 3 seconds or so, brought on by light lag. The alien's reply surprised him.
Are you saying that this ship is not a pirate vessel, Fleet Master? Is it perhaps present on a mission authorized by your species' government?
His counterpart was a shrewd bugger, at least. He was offering Carruthers a way out. If Carruthers confirmed that Caledonia was present on an authorized mission, then that would negate the Charter's violation. Yes, it would be a diplomatic incident instead, but that really changed nothing. This already was a diplomatic incident. Besides, diplomatic incidents could be smoothed over, relationships repaired, and bridges mended. Caledonia and her crew, meanwhile, were irreplaceable, not to mention the security risks. With her power systems so badly damaged, there was no guarantee that the ship's computers could be properly sanitized, which could become a potentially catastrophic security leak if the ship was captured or if an intact hard drive was recovered from its wreck. Her mission was sanctioned by my government, he agreed, conditional on the recognition that there is no such thing as a unified human species government. We represent a faction.
Then your faction is in violation of Article 3 of the Charter,
the ET declared.
Nevertheless, the rules of engagement permit me to grant you the right to effect repairs and quit the field.
My thanks, Carruthers replied.
We shall patrol this volume to ensure that the situation does not escalate,
his opposite number informed him.
The element remaining in this frame of reference will withdraw to a distance equivalent to your own. No element of either fleet shall approach the damaged ship without first informing the other fleet and securing acknowledgement. Acceptable?
Acceptable, Carruthers agreed.
Out.
Carruthers sighed relief as the conversation ended. I call that a win, he declared. Date point, 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 3 days AV. Heavy System Picket Utopian Aspiration. Perfection System, the Core Worlds. Fleet Master
Zick
relaxed and nodded slowly.
We may consider ourselves victorious,
he observed.
Withdraw the on-field fleet element to a distance of 1 light re.
He watched, satisfied, as the ships obeyed. May I ask how, Fleet Master? The questioner was Mepher, the shipmaster, whose job was to tend the business of running the Utopian aspiration so that Zerk's attention was freed to focus on the larger scale. She was a Cortai, which was a rarity. They usually disdained military pursuits as unworthy of a rational and inquiring mind. On the other hand, mastering a heavy system picket, and possibly the fleet one day, probably appealed to the Cortai's ego.
Their fleet master just confessed to illegal military activity in a Dominion system, authorized by a legitimate species faction.
Zook pressed the fingertips of his primary arms together confidently.
A few re ago, we were facing the possibility of a battle that would undoubtedly have angered them, and I assume you saw how well they fared against the swarm of swarms above Garden.
Quite. Not a fight in our favor, Mepher agreed.
I know I would prefer to live to an old age,
Zik agreed.
Even if our superior gross mass might have carried the day, what little I know of human doctrine suggests that they will target the command first if they are able.
That would be sensible, Mepher agreed. It's what I would do.
So, we save face by securing a confession. They reclaim their damaged ship. There may be further sanctions against these Deathworlders in the aftermath, or at least they may have expended whatever goodwill they earned at Capital Station.
Zik gave a satisfied snort.
As I said, a victory.
I would suggest, Fleet Master, that they capitulated rather easily, Mepher pointed out.
Meaning?
If the political damage they will suffer is as severe as you believe, then their Fleet Master's rapid and uncoerced confession suggests that whatever that ship was there to do is more valuable to them than the political fallout.
You think it may have something valuable on board?
Something worth risking the ire of the whole interspecies dominion, Mepher agreed. Even the Gowans would be obliged to impose sanctions if the Security Council demands it.
Zik snorted.
Those troublemakers would find a way to wriggle out of it, he declared.
Be careful, Fleet Master, Mepher advised. It wouldn't do for a being in your position to be thought of as prejudiced.
Zik glanced around the bridge and agreed.
Shall we continue this conversation in private, Shipmaster?
Of course. Undershipmaster, the bridge is yours.
They stepped into the wardroom.
So, the question is, what were they up to on Perfection?
Zik mused.
That much is not clear. 2 planetary security officers attempted to detain one of the human agents, only to be incapacitated.
Incapacitated?
Zerk repeated, alarmed. He'd heard the horror stories about what a human's advanced biology could do to ordinary people.
Subdued and carefully bound. They were completely unharmed, apparently.
Meffer quirked a corner of her eye orbit, a subtle quartile gesture denoting a blend of mild amusement and grudging respect.
Apparently, the human that did this then jumped off a rooftop.
Even in, by their standards, low gravity, terminal velocity must surely be fatal,
Zerk pointed out.
No body was found. The human appeared to be wearing some kind of advanced armor system, possibly one with limited flight ability.
Zik considered his options. If the humans really were up to something that they valued more than the good relations with the Dominion, then he was duty-bound to investigate. If, on the other hand, this was simply a case of interspecies psychological differences, then he could not afford to make accusations which he would later regret. A circumspect approach was necessary.
I understand that information brokering is a healthy gray market on Perfection,
he observed. Meffer was a local. She nodded sagely.
Indeed, Fleet Master.
Those brokers, reliable?
Their reputations are their livelihoods, Meffer said. The very best are utterly dependable.
But expensive, I imagine.
Many are, yes. The most notorious, and arguably the best, is known as the Contact, though I understand that caution is called for when dealing with them.
Why?
They are known for being completely fair and reasonable. A favor for a favor. A boon for a boon.
Zik swayed his head.
And that is grounds for caution because...
Once in the Contact's orbit, it is a rare client that can find the acceleration to break free,
Meffer explained.
The Contact has a knack for spending their owed favors very wisely, and being owed a boon by the Fleet Master of the System Defense Force would be...
I see.
Zik accepted the caution with a nod.
Who would you recommend?
Meffer inclined her head slightly, a gesture that Zik knew meant she was most likely tapping into the shared network of data available to all Quartai who hadn't actually been expelled by the Directorate.
The current best pick is a relative newcomer, believed to be a Chanasho, goes by the alias Dread. Supposedly very effective. What exactly is it that you wish to know?
Those humans went to Perfection for a reason. I want to know what that reason was, or at the least where to start looking. Where they landed, what they did there, how they left.
If they left.
If they left, yes, thank you.
Zik sketched a gesture of thanks.
I will leave it in your capable hands.
Of course, Fleet Master.
Date point. 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 3 days, AV. Planet Perfection. The Core Worlds. 11.
53. The situation has unfortunately unfolded peacefully.
11 frowned and sipped at her stolen body's favorite beverage. It paid to remain in character even when the risk of discovery was infinitesimal. As far as anybody in the galaxy who knew her might deduce, Morik was sitting in a marketplace cafe and enjoying a nice quirr and the sunshine.
11.
A crippled starship on an illegal operation, and the situation unfolded peacefully?
53. The humans readily admitted to the violation. The Fleet Master offered them time to repair and withdraw under 11.
I'm familiar with the article. Did you engineer an alternate solution? 53's reply had the tinge of wounded dignity, common amongst agents who felt their competence was being questioned.
53. I did. The Fleet Master has been persuaded to investigate the human operation more thoroughly via an infobroker named Dread.
11 finished and paid for the drink and then stood up.
11.
Well done. It should be simple enough for me to allow this infobroker to catch up with me.
53. To what end?
11. It can be no coincidence that my host returned from an expedition which discovered the lost Mawarki station, found it under occupation, and then within hours of claiming the bounty, a strike force of human special forces attempted to seize her.
53. I understand. That station was equipped with an industrial nanofactory. 11.
Indeed. Yet another infraction on their part. Article 12 of the Charter. If we can expose their contempt for interspecies law and force the Dominion to act, it'll drive a wedge between the humans and their only ally.
53. The Gowans? Fleetmaster Avkern is of the opinion that they will find some way to, in his words, wriggle out of it. 11.
Not even the Gowans can wriggle out of a Security Council directive, not without violating the Charter themselves.
53. And, unlike the humans, they are Charter signatories and full members of the Security Council, rather than the mere associate members.
11's satisfaction was translated into Mormorik's face as a smug expression and a swagger in her step.
53. How much detail should I give this dread?
11 accessed their file on that particular broker. Frustratingly, unlike most of the other major info brokers in Perfection's gray market, Dread was apparently not a user of cybernetics. The hierarchy's information on them was all but non-existent. That implied either a buffoon or fearsome competence, and Dread's reputation suggested the latter.
11.
Very little, I think. Detail? Yes. A detail that a ship called Negotiable Curiosity departed from a landing platform near the incident site shortly afterwards, and that you suspect a correlation. Let Dread do the rest. If their reputation is accurate, that should be all they need.
53. And what will you be doing? 11.
The opposite of usual good practice. I will be laying a trail. Date point. 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 3 days AV. HMS Caledonia, Perfection System, the Core Worlds. Chief Michael Andau. There was a snap, a flash, and an alarm squeak from under the third rack. Andau grabbed Patel's heel and hauled her out from under there sharpish as the cat bank flashed and raged some more before the surge protectors finally got their act together and shut off the circuit. You okay? She lay on her dolly cart for a second, clutching her multimeter to her chest, wide-eyed and hyperventilating, but managed to find a nod from somewhere.
Yes, Chief. Rack 3, Box J7 isn't safe.
The shocked mood amongst the team evaporated with a minor laugh, which Andau led. Thank you, Hooky, he said dryly, then turned to Evans. Go get our girl a cuppa, Abby. Patel sat up and shook herself off. Being petite and slender meant that she always got the jobs which involved somebody wriggling into a tight space, a role she normally seemed perfectly happy with. Still, nobody could fail to be unsettled by having a megafarad capacitor spark angrily a few inches in front of their nose. Caledonia wouldn't have been a British warship without a ready supply of tea on hand. With his arm in a sling and wrapped in burn dressings and bandages, Evans wasn't much used for anything save fetching messages and keeping everybody hydrated, but he'd got out of the infirmary as quickly as the doctor would let him to lend his good hand to the repair effort. He made a surprisingly good cup of tea considering he was having to work off-handed, and pretty soon Saki Patel was nursing a warm cup of dark brown fragrant liquid. For any Brit, this was a panacea. Fire scoured the ship? Cuppa. One of your colleagues burned alive? Cuppa. Malfunctioning ultracapacitor to spit electrical death in your face? Sit down for a bit and have a nice brew. Andau, for his part, marked off the damaged cell on the control software, permanently killing power to that particular capacitor. At this rate, we'll be lucky to get above the red line, he grumbled, referring to the minimum threshold required for the ship to activate the jump engine and return to Cimbrian. The only lower threshold was the black line, minimum life support. Patel sipped her tea.
We'll get there. Racks 2 and 1 are hardly scorched. If either of them are okay, then we'll hit yellow.
Damn it, Hooky, let me be pessimistic for once, Andau chuckled. She was right, of course, but it was his job to obsess over everything that could go wrong.
Nuh-uh, Chief.
She swigged back the drink in its entirety, lay back on her dolly, and hoisted herself back under the capacitors.
You don't get to bask in your doom and gloom on my watch.
Your watch? Andau snorted. She wheeled herself back out from under the rack long enough to give him a big jocular grin, then vanished again. Tea. It could fix everything. Date point. 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 3 days AV. Planet Perfection. The Core Worlds. Germ of the Exiled. Easily the most dull part of Germ's workday was the parade of sapient beings who, apparently lacking any basic literacy skills, ignored the signs in 15 different languages which directed them to the terminal kiosks and thus kept darkening the front of his desk. Such was the life of a bounty broker, freelance contract agent, and general bringer-together of people. All Germ really provided was a room full of bulletin boards and kiosks, and the financial middle-being services between contractor and contractee. Not deigning to acknowledge shadows on the far side of his desk was a habit by now. He just kept watching his fiction series, a truly awful Ruaher dramatization of the opening stages of the Robalan War, and politely informed the good being that had sought his attention that while he, Germ, was at present indisposed, their needs, whatever said needs might be, would most conveniently and expediently be processed via the digital proxies available in their immediate vicinity.
The boards are to your left.
A tablet was set down on the desk in a cybernetic hand. When he glanced at it, irritated, it had a simple message on it. Not boards. Must speak with you.
Don't you speak?
He asked the creature that owned that hand. This thing, a Chinasho, judging by its height, long legs, and digitigrade bipedal stance, clearly valued its anonymity, as it was wearing a full-length cloak and robes with built-in privacy field generators that hazed it in darkness. There was an alarming but almost invisible hint of dull red eyes glowing somewhere inside the hood. The tablet was picked up, tapped at, and set down. No, it read.
Don't or can't.
This was not dignified with a reply. Instead, when the tablet was set down this time, it read, Korumbura claimed a bounty here recently. Germ rasped an exasperated wing buzz and turned to face the cloaked figure fully. Its height and garments were genuinely unnerving, but he wasn't about to let that show. He knew immediately which specific Korumbura this alien was discussing, but he wasn't about to be bullied.
Lots of Korumbura claim bounties here, he shot back. So do Locale, Ruckaderpderp, Alabanalin, Chinasho.
He buzzed again to drive the point home.
Even the occasional Gowian.
His desk hummed and alerted him to an incoming transaction of some 400 Dominion credits.
One particular Korumbura does stand out, however,
Germ continued smoothly. The tablet was lifted, tapped on, and replaced. Name?
Murwork.
That is the one. Why does she stand out?
She found Murworky Station.
This revelation did not seem to impress. Germ clacked his mandible irritably.
You have heard of it?
The tall figure did not react in any way, so Germ flooded his vestigial wing casings irritably and did this creature the minor service of copying across the files on Murworky along with every scrap of data he had on Murwormork. The robed alien gathered its tablet and left without any thanks. Germ was glad to watch it go. Date point. 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 4 days AV. Heavy System Picket Utopian Aspiration. Perfection System, the Core Worlds. Fleetmaster
Zkerknt of Current. We are at a distinct tactical disadvantage.
Assorted variations on the theme of dismay rippled around the room as nearly 200 shipmasters under Zik's command absorbed his words. Fortunately, if there was one thing Dominion fleets had become very good at over the long years of interspecies relations, it was controlling who got to speak and when. Rather than being inundated with opinions, Zerk was pinged with requests sorted and prioritized by an algorithm that sorted for seniority, position within the fleet structure, political relevance to the subject at hand, and 1,000 other variables. The first speaker was a Vogork shipmaster of the Heavy System Picket Copper King.
Fleetmaster, we outnumber them 6-1, and outmass them by a factor of 10, he objected. Their ships have no defensive shields. Our railguns would shatter them. Under what circumstances is that a tactical disadvantage? Numbers, mass, and firepower count for nothing if we have an effectively zero chance of hitting them, Zerk pointed out. They control the engagement range. They control the angles of fire, and our sensors struggled to secure an adequate lock on the damaged one, even at extreme close range.
A fellow Returk shipmaster chimed in.
Fleetmaster, do we not intend to honor the conditions of the third article? We do, Zerk replied. However, we are investigating possible violations of other articles, some of which will supersede the third and compel us to seize or destroy that ship. If we must do so, then the fleet must be ready to enact the plan of attack that I have devised.
He called up the simulations he had run.
The humans depend on their warp-capable weapons and their sensor-scattering hulls. Both advantages will be negated by closing the fleet to point-blank range. At that distance, any one of our heavy system pickets will have the durability and firepower to smash them all. The difficult part will be landing the ambush on them before they have time to respond and evade.
The scale pulled back, showing the command element, the fleet element currently hiding behind the moon, and the element in orbit around the humans at warp.
If I give the order, second group,
the element behind the moon lit up,
will warp through third group as it crosses their line of approach. The space-time distortions caused by the element already at warp should disguise second group's bow wave as they accelerate. From that distance, the humans will have less than 1,000th of a ree to react. Even they don't have reflexes that quick.
The simulation zoomed back in on the human fleet. The icons representing the second group shot into the battle space and instantly deployed gravity spikes.
Second group will immobilize the humans immediately upon landing. From there, the superior firepower and shielding of our ships will do the rest. Any questions?
As anticipated, the top of the list was their lone Gowan shipmaster, whose ship, the Racing Thunder, was part of second group. I must object to... Zerk interrupted the furry male with a curt swipe of all four hands.
I do not care what your clan of females will have to say about this, nor do I care about what it will do to your crew's mating prospects. I do not care for your politics, your personal misgivings, nor for your species' relationship with these Deathworlders, he snapped. You will follow orders or else be arrested and tried on charge of dereliction of duty, and Gao will be sanctioned for supplying a mutinous vessel to serve in a system defense fleet.
Under protest, then, Fleetmaster. The Gowan bared his teeth angrily and dropped out of the briefing. Zerk would discipline the insubordinate creature later. One of his fellow Returks stood up.
Would it not be more expedient, Fleetmaster, she suggested, to simply record whatever infraction the humans have committed and apply sanctions against them? I do not see why engaging them in battle will be necessary. Every rick there present in this system is a rick in which the hunters might learn of their presence and swarm down on us, Zik pointed out. Their occasional probing attacks and the raids are bad enough. We all remember the loss of the Gurvog the last time they attacked. If the swarm of swarms were to come...
Nods and other gestures of agreement and understanding passed around the shipmasters.
They will be given a fair and reasonable interval to repair their ship and depart, Zerk asserted. But I will not subject the billions of sapiens who call this system home to the threat of being hunted. Are there any further questions?
There were not.
Make all necessary preparations and await my command,
Zerk ordered.
We will await the result of the investigation.
Date point. 10 years, 4 months, 1 week, 4 days AV. HMS Violent Perfection System. The Core Worlds. Commodore William Carruthers. A briefing session, then. Looks that way, sir. Every ship in the fleet, all talking to their flagship at once. Carruthers was taking a working lunch al desco, a ploughman's sandwich, an apple and a coffee. How long until I get to listen? He asked, sipping his coffee. There was a chuckle from the intel chief aboard HMS Myrmidon. We've got the Watsons working on it right now, he said. Dominion encryption isn't anything special. How long?
The computers think about an hour or so. In my experience, that usually means an hour and a half. Good. Keep me posted. Will do, sir. The link to the Myrmidon closed. Carruthers sat back and mused on the two salvaged hierarchy ships. Both were, frankly, almost a liability. The unhappy marriage of human technology with integrated systems that had been designed by a civilization literally millions of years older than humanity was, after all, the reason they were here. Were it not for their engines, neither ship would have been worth the hassle. The hierarchy kinetic thrusters made all the difference. They were simply more advanced than the best human efforts so far, converting the electrical energy that was pumped into them into a kinetic energy for the ship with greater efficiency, and by no small margin. While all of the ships in his fleet could pull a Delta V that would have seriously inconvenienced the crew if not for the inertia-softening effects of their warp engines, the V-types only managed to keep up with Caledonia and Myrmidon because they have a third less mass. That extra efficiency allowed for bigger ships. Bigger ships meant more room for stuff, and the stuff they carried was absolutely invaluable. In Caledonia's case, the stuff in question was a small field hospital in what would have been her port landing bay, and the SOR staging area in her former starboard landing bay. Myrmidon, meanwhile, was a flying power plant, armed with more fusion generators, more ultracapacitor banks, and more force field emitters than anything else in the fleet. Once Caledonia's power systems were sufficiently intact to receive the aid, Myrmidon could provide enough for both of them. Both of those ships, however, carried what Carruthers considered to be the fleet's most potent tactical assets, the Watsons. IBM's Watson systems were nothing new. They'd been around and gathering steam even before the Vancouver incident. 10 years of innovation and development past that point meant that both ships were carrying banks of number-crunching supercomputers of staggering power, underpinned by a software framework that could calculate, correlate, extrapolate, simulate, educate, and even innovate with discomforting speed and precision. Each of the V-types were carrying a smaller version, which linchpinned the fleet's electronic warfare capabilities. But the ones on the Caledonia, coupled with the dedicated expertise of the men and women of the Fleet Intelligence Center aboard Myrmidon, they were the real nerve centers of the flotilla. Decrypting the Dominion fleet's communications was a fraction of what they could achieve, and had Caledonia's power systems been online to lend her own Watsons to the efforts, Carruthers might almost have been able to eavesdrop in real time. When it was all up and running, everyone in CIC and the entire fleet flirted with swearing that the ships were almost alive and capable of anticipation. They weren't so much in charge of ship's sensors anymore as they were having a conversation with a robust, distributed network of pattern-matching engines that effortlessly and dramatically switched between independent and synchronous systems thousands of times a second, sharing their datasets and dividing the workloads to comb the information they got from every ship, every Bulldog drone, every Firebird, and, when they were present, drones, satellites, and even the SOR's EV mass sensors. Really, the one thing stopping him from being able to run several simulations of the possible battles that might unfold was the paucity of data regarding the capabilities of Dominion warships, and that would change if they got the chance to see them in action today. Every datum they recorded went into these computers, expanding and improving their store of knowledge. The more they had, the more they correlated, and the more they correlated, the more useful they became. Eventually, maybe, he'd be able to turn to them for everything. For now, however, Carruthers had only his wits and his expertise to go on. His wits and expertise were telling him that eavesdropping on that alien conversation couldn't possibly come soon enough. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am the Casual Deathworlder, your host, and this has been The Deathworlders, Chapter 27, Part 1. If you enjoyed this content, please remember, feed the algorithm. Feed it well, feed it often. Just remember, don't try and pet it. It bites. And last person it bit, we had to put down because he was turning into an AI spam bot. While you're getting all that down, please smash those like and subscribe buttons and consider dropping a comment down below for engagement purposes. And as always, share. As always, a huge shout out to my editor Gregor. Thank you very much, buddy. I couldn't do this without you. Another huge shout out goes to all the new people who have joined this channel over the last few months. You are the reason I do this. Thank you. Thank you very much. And lastly, if you haven't already done so, I invite you to join our community over on Discord. The channel invite link is in the channel description at the top of the page on YouTube and Rumble. Come join our community and join in on the fun. Until next time, be safe, be well. I love you all. Bye-bye. And as you can see, unlike Net Narrator, I can actually pronounce fucking Carruthers. Alright, where the fuck am I?